This talk was given by Roshi Rafe Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
Today, I'm going to take a look at a kind of vision of, since we're now in the year 2025, and it may be a challenging year for many reasons, I'd like to look at something very fundamental as this first Teisho of 2025, a vision of a Buddhist outlook and also behavior. I think you'll see why as we go into it. It's from an older book of mine, The Hungry Tigress, the completely revised and expanded edition, which I think came out around 1999. And there were a couple of follow-up sections after the stories and notes. This one in this edition is called Liking Jatakas, and it begins with a quote from Norman MacLean in his book, Young Men and Fire. It's about firefighters, and a kind of devastating story. The quote is, "A storyteller, unlike a historian, must follow compassion wherever it leads." A storyteller, unlike a historian, must follow compassion wherever it leads. So while tradition asserts, and this is a chapter again called Liking Jatakas, while tradition asserts that the original narrator of the Jataka Tales, the stories of the Buddha's earlier births, was the Buddha himself, history remains equivocal. Textual analysis reveals strata within collections of Jatakas that indicate a range of possible originators. Nonetheless, whoever that first narrator or narrators may have been, he, she, or they, clearly felt the primal impulse of storytelling towards compassion. Because of this, the Jatakas today are not just the old tales of a particular religious or cultural tradition. Rather, they remain expressions of a core place in the imagination. In the Jatakas, taken at their best, compassion is not only given the freest rein, but is liberated to reshape the world as it desires. In the Jatakas, we see the world as a realm of bodhisattvic impulse, bodhisattvic vision. It can be unnerving. Ordinary perspectives can be overturned and strange things happen. A prince offers his own body to a starving tigress so that she and her cubs may live. A king slices healthy flesh from his bones to save a dove and feed the hawk that had sought her life. A lion and an elephant spontaneously risk and lose their own lives in order to protect shipwrecked men. A deer leaps into a swollen river to carry a drowning swimmer to safety. The tales can be uncompromising and bizarre, but they express too a tenderness between the realms, human and animal, God, demon, or nature spirit, such as we might hope to find in an as yet uncreated literature of deep ecology. In these tales, humans are not higher than animals. Indeed, animals are often wiser than humans. And compassion, springing from insight into the fundamental equality of all living things, precedes preoccupation with the self. Each Jataka is traditionally viewed as the recounting of a past life of the Buddha. Amazingly, many of these 550 Pali Jataka tales that comprise the so-called the Jataka, as well as the more varied Mahayana Jataka tradition, that's in Sanskrit, not Pali, are stories of animal births. So the Buddha, the great teacher, it seems, spent many of his past lives not in lofty human or divine states, but among the animals. Of course, to be honest, This may spring from the interest of early Buddhist storytellers in recycling animal fables already known to them from the classical Indian story tradition. But what is low after all? And what is high? As Henry Beston's well-known words from his classic The Outermost House put it, we need another wiser and perhaps more mystical concept of animals. We patronize them for their incompleteness, for their tragic fate of having taken form so far below ourselves, and therein we err, for the animal shall not be measured by the man. In a world older and more complete than ours, they move finished and complete, gifted with extensions of the senses we have lost or never attained, living by voices we shall never hear. They are not brethren. They are not underlings. They are other nations, caught with ourselves in the net of life and time, fellow prisoners in the splendor and travail of the earth. Zen students may think of the second koan in the Gateless Barrier, text of 48 koans, spiritual challenges designed to open the mind's eye and further refine understanding. There, Master Wu Men's commentary to the koan of Bai Chong and the Fox concludes, "If you have an eye to see through this, you will know that the former head of the monastery, who was, the koan states, reborn as a fox, did enjoy his 500 happy, blessed lives as a fox." And there is that most central koan, Zhao Chu's Mu, in which a monk asks, does even a dog have the Buddha nature? So where is high and where is low? As naive, simple, and folklorish as the individual tales of the Jatakas may be, the vision of the Jatakas as a whole is not quite so quaint. In these stories, equal attention is given to the needs and interests and aspirations of the non-human, a very contemporary perspective after all. I'm reminded of Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Gary Snyder, who's a Zen elder, and an important one, gave a very fine and brief definition of deep ecology in a workshop that I took with him some years back. And he said, deep ecology is one which gives equal weight to the needs of the non-human. Through the Jataka Tales, an ethos connecting all living things is given life. However, until recently, the Jatakas were viewed by Westerners as mere children's fables. They seem to throw Buddhism, initially characterized by Western scholars as rationalistic and pessimistic, but I do wonder, with that pessimistic view, what these commentators ever did with the Buddha's smile. I mean, the Buddha sitting serenely in the lotus posture with a smile on his face. And yet Western early commentators somehow saw Buddhism as a very pessimistic perspective. What were they missing? How blindly were they conditioned to miss it? In any case, they seemed to throw Buddhism back into the morass of emotion and myth, back among the talking animals of the nursery, as the Jatakas seem to do that for the early commentators. But perhaps these are not such juvenile places after all. Myth, we now understand, is one of humanity's most profound and subtle forms of thinking. And is there anything intrinsically childish about talking animals, except, that is, for what we ourselves imagine them to be saying? Dolphins, gorillas, whales, crows, wasps, bees. In reality, none are silent. Are stones silent? Are stars or trees? We think of that as childish, but what if it's really a perception of reality? Such tales may seem childish, but the archetype they open to us of a world buzzing with life and communication is intrinsically mature, even powerful. The universe they thrust before us is like an endless, ongoing, multi-tiered conversation with everyone and everything having its voice. Many Jatakas, like the best folk tales around the world, are actually not so much childish as childlike. And hooray, I say for that. They restore us to a realm of mind that we abandon to our peril, a realm of wonder in which everything is alive. And how mature are we, anyway? The chaos and violence of our human-centered world and of our often insane policies and politics, and this was written over 20 years ago, maybe 25, rarely offers proof of true adulthood, reimagining the old intimate ways of fur and teeth, hooves and claws, whinnies, grunts, barks, chirps, moans, and roars may be just the tonic we need. Not knowing is most intimate, as one old Zen master put it. Maybe we think and think we know too much and are suffering from this. I don't know if you remember some of the writings from the 60s, but there was a book of Michael McClure's called Ghost Tantras, I think published by City Lights, that was made up of basically growls and roars and tweets and was not in human language, but in animal languages. It was a popular book in the 60s, Ghost Tantras. In any case, perhaps it is among the animals in the world of unknowing, of so-called dumb instinct, that we may find a deep, abiding vision. Shujo, Honrai, Hotekinari, is from the beginning, all beings are Buddha, is what Hakuin Zenji, one of the great elders of Japanese Zen and of American Zen today, said. All beings are Buddha, wasp, donkey, lynx, otter, raven, sperm whale. Each is its own being, each its own realm, each whole and complete, each the universe itself, each interwoven seamlessly with all other beings, all other universes. To drop one's tedious burdens of mind and enter this realm in that timeless company is to rediscover delight from the beginning. That has been just so. The Jatakas, a traditional part of the Buddhist canon, are not simply children's tales, but a dramatic and popular teaching presenting this heart of Buddhist vision. In them, the highest ethical and spiritual principles may be dramatized from within the furred, feathered, claw, dumb animal realm. The Mahayana, or great vehicle, which supports all beings, is demonstrated, little doorways to it kept open by such Jatakas. The carvings at the Indian Buddhist shrine of Sanchi, the paintings of the Ajanta caves, the vast monument of Borobudur all show that the tales spring from the oldest layers of the 2,500-year-old Buddhist tradition. And at the heart of the Jataka tradition at its best, and of course there are always admittedly many tales that fall far short of the tradition's own highest ideals, just because, I remember talking to Dane and Roshi some years ago with their about their Vesic celebration. When I was in Rochester, I was doing Jataka Tales. That became a tradition to have someone tell Jataka Tales at Kapleau lineage places for Vesic. He said people would find Jatakas that were just terrible, just awful. But because they were in the Jataka collection, they would tell them at Vesic. And he kept trying to tell people, no, you have to look for the ones that are really about compassion, the ones that really have something to say. It's not just because it's a Jataka, it's going to be a great story. But it was... there are always stories that get thrown into collections that are recycled from older tradition or other traditions that may not hit the note. So, of course, like anything else, keep your wits about you when going to the Jatakas. You'll find some really nasty stories in there, among some truly compassionate, mind-blowing ones. In any case, indeed, at the heart of the imagination itself, as evidenced by cultural traditions worldwide, are oracular and numinous animal presences. Children in every neighborhood can claim this same visionary mind. I know, as did you, that the neighborhood cat stalking among the bushes or prowling along the brick wall was endowed with all the burning mystery of Blake's tiger, or Christopher Smart's cat Jeffrey, or of Mowgli's awesome companion Bagheera, the Black Panther. I knew as you did that clay, wooden, or plastic animals carried amiably enough through the day in the pockets of one's blue jeans could come alive. As an adult, I found that the Jatakas spoke directly to this missing area of the imagination, a realm I had known intimately as a child. In their excesses, I found a literature which spoke a simple truth. All living things have consciousness and meaningful destinies. The tales showed, too, what pure compassion looks and feels like. Compassion which no longer cares what the world or ego thinks. Compassion which doesn't look down on other species, but lives harmoniously with and among them. This is a real insight into our place on this planet. Think of all the harm we've done ignoring this so-called childish view. In the Jataka's compassion, like some great, wildly talented genius of a shapeshifter, takes every possible form, extending 1,000 helping arms and 11 clear-seeing heads into every realm of being. In them we discovered that animals and humans are members of a living, mysterious universe. We find, too, that animals may be our teachers and benefactors. Having been on this earth longer than us, they are the elders, which is not to say that they might not be as completely foolish as humans in these tales. They can be, but they can also point the way to maintaining what we have all too often lost, the wisdom of the heart. And sometimes, under the right conditions, even we humans, as lost in our heads, as we so often are, can regain a dignity and wisdom equal to theirs. Certainly it is an idealized view, but the imagination and the world would be the poorer without it. So, still guiding us from the heart of Buddhist life and practice after 2,500 years are the Jatakas. Recite the first of the 4 great Buddhist vows. All beings without number, I vow to liberate. For the many beings are numberless, I vow to free them all. And you will find yourself coming again into their domain. It is archaic territory, very close to us today. It is archaic territory, but strangely, in this time of the wholesale dying of species, very close to us today. In light of these tales' contemporary relevance, I asked some noted Buddhist teachers and writers what their favorite Jataka tales might be and why, and here are their responses. And because these interviews that I did are over 25 years old now, some of the people we'll hear from in this are long dead, long gone. So this is an interesting legacy that I was able to speak to some of these people, as you'll see. So, Andrew Schelling. Andrew Schelling is a noted poet. He was assistant director at the time of the Naropa Writing Project. I met Andrew first here. He came he happened to be in town teaching, came to Avesic, and he and I became friends and often shared our work. So he wrote, "My favorite Jataka is the Monkey King, a human despot angered that a band of monkeys," the Naropa Project was out at, Boulder, in Boulder, the university, Naropa Institute, right. And I think Ann Waldman was the other director there with him. So a human despot angered that a band of monkeys that lives in a magic mango tree is feeding on its fruit and orders his bowmen to slaughter the monkeys. The king of these monkeys makes an escape bridge out of his own body, sacrificing himself so that his tribe can flee to safety. Then occurs one of those incessant dreams so historically rare as to seem nearly hopeless. The human tyrant, stunned at this brave, selfless act, loses his taste for slaughter and begs to hear what teachings the battered, dying Monkey King holds. How rare are such turns of heart in the annals of any nation. Not since the Buddhist king Ashoka has a powerful warrior so swiftly realized the power of laying aside the bow. He goes on, "Until this failed human experiment we call the state withers away, dropping its arrows and leaving government in the hands of local decentralized communities. Until that time, the great Buddhist dream for this world is that kings and prime ministers, presidents and generals, anyone who controls the fate of another, may be touched and transformed by tender acts. May all beings attain unsurpassable enlightenment." A prayer for 2025 that I hope will not go unheeded. Next, Prince Five Weapons answered author, eco-philosopher, and peace worker Joanna Macy, a story in which the Buddha, I hope you know Joanna Macy's work, of living in a time of nuclear despair and empowering compassion in this world. She's been an absolutely fearless presenter of how to face our time head on. In any case, she says, Prince Five Weapons, a story in which the Buddha, as a young prince, risks his life to subdue a huge sticky-haired monster, converting him at last to harmlessness and good. It celebrates the indomitability of raw courage. Even when all his weapons were of no avail, even when horrifyingly stuck to the huge sticky monster by limbs and head, and isn't that a familiar feeling to all of us right now? Stuck to such a sticky monster. Even then, the prince still trusted in the sword of truth within, and that freed him, and, as it turned out, freed the monster as well. "I won't try to pick my very favorite," wrote Robert Aitken Roshi, just one among many. "The one I have chosen illustrates the dana paramita, that is, the perfection of giving, noble, selfless giving, generosity, we might say. It is a story of the hare sacrifice, a story of offering oneself to be eaten. In it, the Buddha is a little hare who offers his own body as food to a starving beggar. The beggar is really the king of the gods who has taken this form to test the hare. The Hungry Tigress story, in which the Buddha offers his body to a starving tigress and her emaciated cubs, is similar. However, the renewal of the hare through self-giving, the imprinting of the hare on the moon as the embodiment of the gift, and in some versions, the return of the hare to his friends to continue their karma, complete the gift cycle in a way that the Hungry Tigress does not. The gift, worthy of the name, is always a gift of the self as food. This is my body, broken for thee. Without a single thought of survival or reward, I gladly give myself to eat. Unexpectedly, I am not only unharmed, but my life is enhanced. The many beings are nourished, and the gift itself unexpectedly becomes a model for others to emulate. I live out my life with my friends, and we enrich our mutual interdependence and the mutual interdependence of all beings. An unpopular idea, this goes on to the next person, with many people, animals and humans are part of a continuum and share in a spiritual nature, answered animal rights activist Elsie Mitchell of the Ahimsa Foundation. Elsie, too, is gone. The Jatakas do not make the modern assumption that only humans who exhibit violent or cruel behavior are animals. In the Jatakas, all sorts of behaviors are to be found among both human and non-humans. Buddhist behavior is also known and practiced by non-humans according to their circumstances. One of my favorite Jatakas is the three wise birds. In this tale, man learns and greatly benefits from his association with non-human creatures. Just to add a bit to that, I assume we all grew up in some way with pets, have had pets in our life. How can you deny that we learn and greatly benefit from association with non-human creatures? Anyone who's ever had a pet bird or even a pet fish, not to mention cats or dogs, knows these are beings with their own minds and personalities and aspirations and wisdoms. How we've been able to ignore this and treat the living world of various species so poorly is almost beyond belief. The good news is we seem to be realizing this, as we always seem to do, at the very edge of disaster. Maybe it will make a difference. So, onward. Lama Kongtrul Rinpoche said, the story of the Buddha's last birth before his birth as Siddhartha, the Vesantara Jataka. That's the one for me. It's a most difficult story with many interesting turns about a king who offers all his possessions. And this is why this is the Vesantara is a kind of creepy story, to tell you the truth. Oh, it's a very famous one in Asia, because not only does he give all his possessions, his wealth, his status, his elephant, he gives his wife and his children and his own body. Eventually the wife and children are restored, but it looks pretty grim for a while. They're turned into slaves, and he gives them this horrible, horrible person because he's completely free of any sense of attachment and self-centeredness. And that's great, but it's a kind of horrifying story. Speaking as a layperson of little understanding, such as myself, to think that's a weird exemplar, and it's going to be a hard one to really digest. In any case, he says it's a long piece and a nice one. At the end, of course, everything is given back. Yeah, that's true, but we don't know it when it happens. It might be frightening to take the idea that a bodhisattva would offer his own body, but I think it's okay. It all turns out all right. Happy endings are always the best. So storyteller and author Laura Sims, who passed on this information to me, because she was the one who I asked her to ask Rinpoche about it, commented to the Rinpoche on his story, the one he chose, I think this is a tale of unrelenting compassion. Exactly, he replied. Laura added that her favorite Jataka to tell to children is the rabbit in the moon, also known as the hare sacrifice. This is the one that Aitken Roshi already spoke about. She said, I love telling it to children because they have a natural sense of compassion, and they not only feel sympathy for the rabbit who offers his body to the flames, but can also delight in experiencing, in the safety of the story, their own greed and ignorance through the refusal of the other animals to share their food without having to act it out in life. But for adults, my favorite is the banyan deer, a tale in which the Buddha, as a deer king, saves his own herd through his self-sacrifice and courage, and then goes on to liberate yet another herd, then all four-footed, all flying, and all swimming creatures as well from the hunter's bows and spears. I tell it because of its clear emphasis on the nature of compassion and on ruling for the benefit of all. See, isn't it so weird we think of these as children's stories and we adults can't live up to them? It's such a weird split. We relegate these things to the nursery, and we want to keep them locked there because we're terrified of what happens if we release these stories into our adult minds. and really try and live up to the ethics they present. Yes, ruling for the benefit of all, and because hunting for pleasure breaks my heart. Zen teacher Signana Graf of Vermont responded that she had two favorites. First for her also was the banyan deer, which she loved. She says, as soon as I heard it, even before I became a Buddhist, I was a vegetarian before becoming a Buddhist, and this story of a deer who leads a human king to respect all life, and so essentially to become a vegetarian, moved my heart deeply. My other favorite is the spade sage, in which the Buddha, as a gardener long ago, tries 6 times to give up his attachment to his own skill, that is gardening. In fact, it's to give up his own skill, his own attachment to a shovel, before he at last succeeds with the 7th effort. If even the Buddha had to work so hard at it, had to try and fail over and over before success, then there's surely hope for all of us. Buddhist scholar and author Ken Kraft, Ken was a good friend who also passed away maybe 6 or 7 years ago, a very professor of Buddhism and also a very well-known activist for peace and ecological equality. Spoke to monks in Japan. When I was in Japan the first time in '89, traveling and speaking, Ken was my host when I was in Kyoto and took me to some of the great monasteries there. He knew some of the head monks there, and we were able to do zazen and some of the small sub-temples. It was really a very moving experience. In any case, Ken said, a few years ago at an exhibition in Japan, I saw a beautiful depiction of the well-known Jataka story about the Hungry Tigress. It was on a lacquered panel on a 7th century shrine. The key points were unmistakable. A prince, the future Buddha, jumps off a cliff to feed a hungry tigress who's about to eat her own cubs. Because all 3 figures of the prince, hanging his shirt on a tree, diving off the cliff, laying on the ground about to be eaten, are in the same pictorial space, one's eye naturally traces the elegantly depicted jump over and over again. Visually, at least, the Prince Buddha is recycled, reborn. Eventually, the poses acquire a simultaneity, then an equality, and the effect dispels conventional judgments about the 3 states depicted. The prince becomes the tiger becomes the prince, it's fine to eat, it's fine to be eaten. If, like the unknown shrine artist, we can savor the spirit of the story, it becomes a powerful metaphor for the many forms of selflessness, a selfless thought, a selfless act, a selfless moment, a selfless state. In our everyday behavior, even when we know we need to give ourselves away, we usually resist. Yet in the actual doing, we discover the liberating nature of compassionate self-sacrifice. Of course, the story also works as a metaphor for the tremendous selflessness that some spiritual traditions require at a critical stage of practice. As so many masters have said, unless the small self can take the plunge into the abyss of its own extinction, one will never know the unsurpassed joy and freedom that follow. In some ways, every koan, in some small ways, asking us, in fact requiring us to make this leap, to release our hold on ourselves and to leap. It's not a physical leap, it's not even a mental act of leaping, so much as a complete releasing into the vast unknown of this very moment, without clinging to a single concept about it. It's a challenge that we take up again and again and again, and it's why koan practice can be so frustrating, so challenging, so painful, mentally, emotionally, and at the same time so absolutely fulfilling and rewarding. This letting go of self is at the heart of it. The Jatakas touch this territory again and again and again. In a simple yet subtle way, the Japanese shrine panel conveys the natural and grandeur of that timeless sleep. Roshi Philip Kapleau, died in 2004, answered by saying, "There are many Jataka tales that move me deeply. However, for personal reasons, my own life experience and my Zen training, the Jataka which I've seen titled, in fact in this collection, titled Give It All You've Got, strikes the deepest chord." In that tale, a caravan leader strengthens the courage of a young man who is down at the bottom of a dry well digging for water. Being down at the bottom of a dry well is a situation we've all come upon, I would say, many times in our life. It seems the situation can be bleak, hopeless, have no juice to it, no life to it at all. And yet, there's this Jataka about being at the bottom of a dry well, which we'll look at a little further. But I also want to point out it's not just a mental state. Sometimes it's a condition in the world, which is why I chose to read this article, early article of mine. Because sometimes it can seem that the situation we're in the world, is so dry, so without life, that it can seem hopeless. Take heart. Let's see where this Jataka goes. So there's a young man down at the bottom of a dry well. They've sent him down to dig for water in a desert. The caravan is out of water, and if he fails, they will all die. That's the Jataka. They send this young man down because he's the strongest. And they've dug this, it's not a ditch, it's a pit, like a well, a dry well shaft in the desert. And the sand is trickling down, and if a wrong move, he's slinging a sledgehammer because there's a flat stone down at the bottom. And he can feel the water thrumming underneath this stone. He's smashing it again and again with his sledgehammer. If he swings wrong, he hits the side of the well that they've sunk in the desert 10 or 12 feet down. He's going to die. The whole thing is going to collapse on him. But if he doesn't smash that stone, they're all going to die, himself included, because they're out of water. And it's in the middle of a desert. So that's the situation. If he fails, they will die. And this is Roshi Kapleau's favorite Jataka. The rock at the bottom of the well must be broken, but so far it has resisted all efforts. So this is Roshi Kapleau on it. It's a catastrophic moment. The sand is trickling down the well shaft, threatening to collapse. The youth feels he cannot go on. This is certainly something, especially if you've been in a sesshin, many days of sesshin. You can come to such moments. You're digging in a dry well, nothing's happening. It just seems impossible to take another step. It seems impossible to go on. It just seems you've come to the absolute end of your resources. The caravan leader, the Buddha in a past life. He's the caravan leader who's chosen this young man to go down in that well shaft and dig. Calls down to him that the water is there. Be calm and steady, he says. Give it one more shot and give it all you've got. Give it one more shot and give it all you've got. The youth has been totally dispirited at this point, rouses his energy, tries again, and this time breaks through to the life-saving water. Roshi Kapleau goes on. Though simple in plot, direct and unadorned, the story has powerful implications. That determination and persistence are the two indispensable ingredients for success in any endeavor. For me, that relates especially to Zen training. My Zen teacher, Harada Roshi, added another element, conviction. When a Zen aspirant is convinced he can awaken to his true self, he would say, that conviction will generate strong determination, and strong determination results in a persistent all-out effort. Given this mind state, the aspirant can no more miss becoming enlightened than he or she can miss the ground with a stamp of the foot. The story reinforces this, as well as pointing to the indispensable aid that spiritual friends, one's teacher and Sangha, can offer. In my own training in Japan, again this is Roshi Kapleau, I felt very much like that youth in the Jataka tale. When at last my breakthrough was confirmed, I remembered the words on a postcard which my friend Tongan Roshi had once sent me. Remember, we read Tongan Roshi's book, Throw Yourself into the House of Buddha. He too passed away at this point. And he wrote, this is the postcard he received from Tongan Roshi. It was written on it were these words: sometimes, even in the driest hole, one can find water. Sometimes, even in the driest hole, one can find water. It was the spur I needed, and my gratitude to him is boundless. In this Jataka, I found that such experiences have been part of the Buddhist tradition from the beginningless beginning, and my gratitude arises once more. As for myself, that's me, the author of this piece, my favorite personal favorite Jataka is The Brave Little Parrot, a tale in which a parrot tries to put out a raging forest fire. "O monks," said the Buddha in the fire sermon, "this world is on fire." Dipping himself or herself in a river, the parrot flies back and forth through the flames, sprinkling the few drops of water which still cling to his or her feathers. Though the task seems hopeless, they continue. Seeing them continuing on and on beyond thought's despair, despite dangers and fears, the gods themselves are moved. They intervene, rain pours down, and the fire is quenched. Why do I like it? First, because it shows the transformative power inherent in wholehearted action, wholehearted response. To me, wholehearted means beyond thought's ability to figure out what's going on, beyond thought's ability to predict what's going to happen. You just give yourself totally to it. You don't even know why anymore. We can all think of moments in our life where you did something like that. There's a completeness, a wholeness, a freedom. It's not quite devil may care, but it's like you found something important in that wholehearted effort itself. I think of Oscar Wilde's incredible piece of writing from prison, De Profundis. It was quite a thing to read that. He had been in prison for sodomy, which was illegal. He'd be in a homosexual relationship at that time in England. He was imprisoned for it. His whole life was crushed. His reputation was gone. So he wrote this incredibly searching piece of thinking called De Profundis. And in that painful collection of letters from prison, he wrote this: "The fatal errors of life are not due to man's being unreasonable. An unreasonable moment may be one's finest moment. They are due to man's being logical." I'll read that again. "The fatal errors of life are not due to man's being unreasonable. An unreasonable moment may be one's finest moment. They are due to man's being logical." And we're trapped within our logic is a wonderful tool. It's created by the tremendous illogic of a human mind and body. It has a purpose, but when we live trapped within our logic, we short circuit and shoot ourselves in the foot again and again and again, in the leg, whatever it is, again and again and again. The fatal errors of life are not due to man's being unreasonable. An unreasonable moment may be one's finest moment. They are due to man's being logical. Of course, that has dangers. I wouldn't accept doing that simply because Oscar Wilde wrote a great couple of lines. But I think you can see what it's getting at. Think of those moments in your life where you just went for it, whether it was to express love to someone, whether it was to choose a path that you felt logically made no sense, but whatever it was, there's something there. In any case, logically, a few sprinkles of water can't possibly save a burning world. But the brave little parrot acts out of deepest intuition, does fully that one little thing that he or she can, and all is changed. Each of us, the story reminds us, lives in a burning, transient world. Yet, like the little parrot, we each have a tiny sprinkle of water we can offer. Logically, there's no hope. But we'll stop here and recite our great vows for all.